UFC Des Moines, Iowa took place a few hours ago. I didn't fall asleep during the card and wake up just right now to make this video. No, what are you talking about, dude? No. Today I'm just going to go over the main card because the prelims were kind of snoozy, but I'm going to be talking about all the fights starting from the main event, going down to the beginning of the main cards. So the last fight we got was Cory Sandhagen versus Deiveson Figueredo. This was a pretty solid fight. Cory Sandhagen came out and looked like the ring general with his good jab. He was working an inside low kick, outside low kick, finding the mark with his right hand. His setups were working really well. He actually initiated the first grappling exchange, which I predicted that would happen because he is very good at diversifying and mixing the martial arts, as I had said that he would do in my video predicting that he would give us the master class that he actually did put on. Deiveson Figueredo just looks really flat in this fight. No matter what, he just always looks kind of flat at bantamweight. I thought that the extra weight would do him an increase in power and maybe make him faster because he would be cutting less weight. But it really does seem like he can't do what he wants to do unless he is physically more imposing than the guy that he's fighting. And he has options as to how he can take the fight. Whenever he's 100% fighting the way that his opponent is forcing him to, then you see him break down, and he doesn't look like a good fighter. Cory Sandhagen didn't give him the option to work his striking the way that he would like to in order to set up maybe a knockdown or a knockout. And in the grappling, he never stood a chance because Cory Sandhagen is, if anything, a master of the De La Riva position in Jiu-Jitsu. Whenever he gets that 50-50 with your leg in, he'll go for heel hooks, but what he's really doing is, if you're into mobility stretches at the gym, he's forcing you into like an elevated pigeon where your knee is going across your chest, basically, and you're standing. And what he does is, he'll go for the heel hook, but if it's not there, he'll just sit really high on your hips and then lean into you, so that elevated pigeon is getting cranked past where like your actual range of motion for your knee should be. And he took out TJ Dillashaw the same way. He retired TJ Dillashaw in that fight. So it's very possible that he just retired Deiveson Figueredo too, because I didn't really explain it. The first round went the way that it did, with Cory Sandhagen basically clinging to Figueredo's leg, and he was just wrenching it and cranking it and cranking it and cranking it. It's the same leg too, it's his left leg. And in the second round, they get into a grappling scramble again. Cory Sandhagen pulls for that 50-50 and then just starts working on the De La Riva. And eventually, throughout the grappling sequence, he destroys Figueredo's knee. I don't have any details on what's wrong with him, but this was a TKO via not Duke to stoopage, but the fight was stopped because Deiveson Figueredo basically just stopped fighting back. He got his knee cranked in this De La Riva, and it was enough to where he just didn't want to fight anymore. And this is scary for him because he's in the later part of 30, about to be 40 years old. Let's actually see how old he is. So yeah, Deiveson Figueredo is 37 years old. So he gets his surgery that he'll probably need for the injury that he suffered in this fight, takes a little bit of time off and comes back. Minimum age that we can expect him back is 38 going on 39, and like really close to 39. Maybe even he waits longer and he is 39 and is about to be 40 whenever he makes his return to martial arts. He's a top-ranked bantamweight, so there would be options for matchmaking whenever he does come back, but he was dominated and he couldn't do anything here. There were no shining moments for Deiveson Figueredo in this fight, and it was important that Cory Sandhagen won because the narrative for both of these fighters is that they both lose important fights going into this one. So this is a pretty important fight against each other because this was going to determine who advances through the division and who is just relegated to the gatekeeper position. And Deiveson Figueredo won't be competing to be the gatekeeper because he's going to be recovering from the injury that I just talked about. But whenever he does come back, that's pretty much what he's here to do at bantamweight. He was a champion at 125, but whenever he isn't fighting a strawweight, Deiveson Figueredo looks like a sucker. And that's the reason why I didn't pick him. My main event predictions are actually getting pretty good, you guys. Like, I'm actually very proud of the fact that I'm able to foresee the way that these main events are going to go. Hopefully I'm right about the way that next week's going to end up. But even if I'm wrong, then I'm not going to be too disappointed because I really like both fighters. It was a good and dominant win, but I don't think it's a breakout performance that gets him to a title shot. For this, I think he needs one more solid fight. And if it can say TKO next to the win that he gets in his next fight against a top-level contender, then okay, let's start looking at the title. Then okay, let's start looking at title eliminators, so where like you are guaranteed the number one contender if you win the next fight. If anything, all this really did is just solidify a Sean O'Malley fight. Whenever Sean O'Malley fights Merab, if he wins or loses, Cory Sandhagen is going to be walking towards the belt, whether it's in O'Malley's hands or not. and it may actually be a fight with O'Malley once he loses to Merab for the second time that gets Cory Sandhagen his title shot. So he'll be around for that. He's a young fighter. He's growing up a lot, still getting better in between each of his performances. Takes very little damage in his fights too, so he can stay as active as he wants to be. I like Cory Sandhagen. The only thing is just that with Cory Sandhagen being so calculated, you can't reliably count on finishes coming unless it is having to do with that De La Riva sequence. He's more dangerous in a 50-50 on your leg than he is with his boxing or kickboxing as far as finishing capabilities go. I mean, Marlon Moraes got knocked out, but that guy is like Rice Krispie chin, and he was getting blasted by everyone before he retired. What I'd really like to see is for Cory Sandhagen get a really emphatic knockout, like a Frankie Edgar level knockout over an actual contender that means something for it to happen too. Cory Sandhagen busting Deiveson Figueredo's knee kind of stimulates this division though. It makes me realize that there are still fighters that do have lethal finishing and career-altering capabilities, as we're seeing a bunch of Mario Batistas and Umars and Merabs just sniff. Cory Sandhagen is a fighter to where if you can't neutralize him with that sniff skill set, he may actually hurt the longevity of your career. It's harrowing to watch Cory Sandhagen fight because it may actually be the last time that either him or his opponent does it because he puts it all on the line. This was a good win. Cory Sandhagen showed lots of guts in this performance. I'm very proud of the fact that I saw this coming. I was going to say regrettably I was wrong about this, but honestly I don't regret anything. I have zero regrets, brother. This is fine with me. Bo Nickal he sucks, dude. And I'm tired of acting like I enjoy watching Bo Nickal fight. I enjoy watching Bo Nickal get knocked out, and I didn't even realize that until tonight. Bo Nickal is such a mediocre striker. His only assignment since he joined on in MMA, since he is such a good grappler and knows submission defenses and can set up submissions once he has subdued his opponent with grappling, develop any type of boxing or kickboxing game. Any type. Just do it, please. Just work hard at any type of striking. You could even become a Krav Maga practitioner if you're good enough at it, Bo Nickal. Just do something with your hands and feet. And this man could never seem to figure it out. What the hell he was in there doing with his legs and his hands. And this was against every single fighter after Val Woodburn. He fought Cody Brundage and he looked like a deer in the headlights because Cody Brundage didn't just roll over for him because he actually knew how to wrestle too. He fought Paul Craig. And this was a cricket snooze fest. And he was hard on himself after both performances, but he deserved to be. And honestly, it was just performative because he didn't have any plans on drastically improving his skill set at any of the times that he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry guys, I'm going to go back to the gym and I'm going to come back in better form." And then he shows up at the exact same striker who just is not fun to watch. And his grappling, it's not progressive enough. He's advancing through positions, but what is he really even doing with him? Is he known for anything on the floor other than just getting the takedown? He gets the takedown, but does he do ground and pound? He's not going for subs. Not the way that a grappler like Hamzat does, where it's just a blitz, and then he's going straight for your neck, and if he's not getting a neck, he's going for an arm or something else. Bo Nickal doesn't transition through finishing sequences at all. He's just trying to control with wrestling like he can score points on an NCAA scorecard. Reiner de Ridder didn't have any of this, and he was trying to get wrestled at the very beginning of the fight, and Reiner de Ridder is just a big guy. And Reiner de Ridder, I should have added him to that fighters with the Drickus style list just because of the fact that he is massive, dude. This is a 205er. This is a 205er at 185. A big boy. If anything, like, he's just very large. And one thing that he proved tonight was even though his boxing didn't look very good in pretty much any of the fights that he had against GM3, Kevin Holland, there wasn't much striking that went on there. But against Bo Nickal, he demonstrated that he doesn't just need boxing. He demonstrated a varied skill set to where it's not just these that he needs to finish his fights. He intelligently uses the clinch to set up his boxing, which actually looked not bad tonight. And also knees too, which look even better than the boxing. He was controlling the clinch and doing most of his work there. Bo Nickal was just kind of hanging out at the beginning like, oh yeah, this is just the clinch, I've been here before. And he didn't anticipate the amount of damage that Reiner de Ridder would be able to do in such a short amount of time in the clinch. He was just kind of chilling, shelling with one hand and controlling an overhook, trying to reverse positions. And then he just started getting punched in his body, Bo Nickal, in the second round. It was clear that Bo Nickal's game plan was to come out and test the wrestling, but it seemed like he paid for every single thing that he tried as far as enacting his game plan went. Every single time he'd try for a takedown, he would get caught. Every single time that they would clinch, Reiner would do more damage to him in the clinch. Every single time that they were standing at range, Reiner was just pumping out this leg kick. And he was whipping up kicks to the body. And he was right there. So Bo Nickal would shoot, Reiner would defend, they would clinch. Reiner would push Bo Nickal into the cage. And he would control because he's stronger than Bo Nickal. And that's a feat. Because Bo Nickal is actually pretty physical himself. Even though it doesn't translate to punching power, I mean, he's a very good wrestler. So in order for that to be a true statement, he must also be very strong. And he's demonstrated a great deal of strength throughout his fights in the way that he's able to muscle through these takedowns. Reiner is actually more strong than Bo Nickal, which is a crazy realization for me to make. Reiner in the second round finishes this fight. He's dropping some collar tie uppercuts on Bo Nickal's body and his face. He ends up throwing a couple of knees too, and Bo Nickal doesn't really like these body shots that are coming with the hands already, and then the knee lands. Bo Nickal scrambles off the cage once these body shots start landing, and he's like, whoa, I'm actually getting hurt. Bo Nickal is just so robotic. Just seems like there was just different codes and Python, like, scripts playing in his head. He was getting rocked, and he was like, beep, boop, boop, fire back. And then he would throw 2 punches and then keep moving backwards. He never stood a chance in this fight, dude. And I thought he was going to knock this dude out. This was it. I think altogether I went 6-6. The only reason why I'm breaking down the main card was because I went 4-2 on the main card. And then I went 2-4 on the prelims. This fight here, this was it. I'm never picking Bo Nickal to win another fight against a high-level 185er in the UFC. Just because I really don't know how for real he is about this. It looks like he has his hand in a few different pots. And Bo Nickal is one of those guys where it seems like he's successful at most things that he tries. So I don't know how serious he's taking MMA. Everyone's a critic, you know. But it seems like the work that was necessary to be done between last fight and now, in terms of his striking and the amount of sparring rounds that he should have done with high-level boxers and kickboxers to make sure that he looked like he knew what he was doing in there, that work has not been done. And if it hasn't been done up until this point, there is still a chance for him. But what I'm thinking is he's finished. I'm thinking that this is a hype train that will never be back on its rails and moving again because Bo Nickal isn't going to progress any further. And that sucks because at a certain point, whenever Dricus beat Sean Strickland, I was literally making jokes to my friend like, save us! Bo Nickal, save us! Like the guy that truck in that one video, Bo Nickal, if you can hear me. Bo Nickal, please come save us. Bo Nickal. Like the guy who's praying to Donald Trump in his car. That's literally how it felt, dude. Whenever Dricus first became champ, I thought that Bo Nickal was going to march his ass right to the title and strip Dricus of it. And that did not happen. Bo Nickal is just getting mogged out here. And Reiner is actually a serious contender. And he fights like Dricus, dude. Victory by any means. Very aggressive. Very physical. Lots of gas. So there was actually a point in time where Ponzinnibio wasn't fighting. I think he had come back to fight Li Jingliang. And then he lost that fight in his return. But before then, he was battling a blood infection. And what this did is it messed up his legs. He talks about in an MMA Junkie interview that he had a lot of swelling due to a bacterial staph infection in his blood that ended up swelling up his legs, and it made it so he couldn't fight. And his legs were swollen for a very prolonged period of time. And I don't know how to describe it. The reason why I'm mentioning all of this was because whenever I watch Ponzinnibio fight, he always looks like a wounded animal before the fight even begins. He doesn't move well at all. I'm thinking this has a lot to do with the fact that at one point the quality of his health was so poor, and that it was directly related to his legs. Daniel Rodriguez was in there doing basically whatever he wanted to Santiago Ponzinnibio. At range, he was just dumping a jab off on Ponzinnibio, who was literally moving his head and moving evasively to dodge at every single time where it wasn't required. And all Daniel Rodriguez had to do was just watch Santiago Ponzinnibio burn through all of his energy, wasting his head movement in opportunities where nothing was happening. And then after he was done doing an evasive maneuver, just dump that jab off on him. And so the first 2 rounds were basically spent this way. Whenever Daniel Rodriguez would be coasting on his bike, maybe not even advancing the whole time, but he would just be jabbing Santiago Ponzinnibio, who would walk into range and he would eat one of these stiff sticks, and then he would get front kicked in his body. and he would be moving laterally out of the way at all other times except for whenever this front kick would come. And he ate about 30 front kicks throughout this fight, right on the breadbasket, and this tarnished his gas so he could get finished later. Another thing that Daniel Rodriguez was doing in order to set up his boxing was he was jabbing at range. He showed Ponzinnibio a head kick pretty early. Ponzinnibio started also using a head kick just because he was aping the maneuver that Daniel Rodriguez had used early on. And from this head kick, Daniel Rodriguez was able to get inside and crowd the boxing that was coming after the kick. Since for some reason Ponzinnibio starts his kickboxing combos with the high kick, thrown naked to just slap the guard, Daniel Rodriguez was able to get on the inside through this. And whenever he was able to get on the inside, all he had to do was just string together like 5-6 punch combos. And if the first 2 or 3 shots were taken on the guard, the last 3 would make it through. And that's exactly the sequence that ended up finishing this fight. Daniel Rodriguez ended up chasing Ponzinnibio across the cage in round 3 to stop this one. It was actually a much better fight than I thought it was going to be. Daniel Rodriguez is a pretty solid gatekeeper for this division. I hope he's not watching this. I hope all of these guys who I talk about never see this content, dude. I hope it never makes it to them. Because I say bad things about these. They would hurt me, dude. Daniel Rodriguez is a dangerous fighter as far as like me talking shit on my YouTube channel goes. But whenever we're talking about other welterweights in the world, he's really just a test to see what type of aptitude we're dealing with. Ian Gary got to the UFC and he knocked this guy out. And now Ian Gary was then afterwards recognized as a legitimate prospect because of this win over Daniel Rodriguez. And that's the purpose that he serves in the UFC. Santiago Ponzinnibio needs to stop fighting. It's over, bro. Like, just hang it up. Ponzinnibio and Bo Nickal, they both look like Anthony Smith in these fights. Bo Nickal may have the chance to recover in his career, but Santiago Ponzinnibio is 800% at the end of his rope. Speaking of finished, Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos. Oh my god. Undefeated prospects, man. Undefeated prospects put my heart through the ringer in this sport because I want them to stay undefeated, even though it doesn't really mean anything because everybody loses, except for Khabib. But I mean, the way that people talk about him, they disrespect him more than some fighters who have lost, so losses don't really mean anything, but whenever there is an undefeated prospect, I want to see him keep that O for as long as possible. Daniel Marcos thought that all he had to do was just stuff the takedowns, man. All he was worried about was stuffing the takedowns. He was clinching up a little bit, and then he would get even control on the ground sometimes too. But what he would do is just hold positions where he couldn't work. In the clinch, they were just stagnant. Whenever he was getting wrestled and could scramble, he would just move to the back. Just sit in back take position, not do anything with it, man. And he did actually a really good job of stopping Montel Jackson's chain wrestling offense, but what was happening was Montel Jackson was just throwing punches and kicks in the middle of all the sequences where he was trying wrestling. And Daniel Marcos, his main priority was just stopping the wrestling offense. So he was able to neutralize that part, but he completely neglected the striking, and Montel Jackson didn't even beat him up, he just outpointed him. Montel Jackson spent this whole fight giving Daniel Marcos 4 different 5-punch combinations and different sequences of striking before he would shoot a takedown. Whether he landed the takedown or not, he was mixing up the martial arts really well, and Daniel Marcos was only anticipating shots the entire time. So whenever the boxing was coming through for Montel Jackson, a lot of those shots were landing. Nothing super flush, but nothing for Daniel Marcos either. The announcers were even talking about how even in round 3, there was no significant strike that landed for Daniel Marcos. This was a very underwhelming performance. It looked like neither fighter really wanted to be there. And I talked up this fight as if like it was going to be something really amazing, and it just didn't end up being that way. Montel Jackson got this win. It costed Daniel Marcos his O. Who knows? Maybe for the fact that he's already lost, he'll be able to fight freer. You know, maybe Bo Nickal will also be able to do the same thing now. Maybe that's just the pressure of keeping that O on the fighters' minds that holds them back from actually sitting down on their shots and going for it. Daniel Marcos always seemed like a pretty risky fighter, though, who was willing to put himself out there in order to get the results he wanted. But tonight was a slow day at the office. I didn't really like what I saw out of either of these fighters. Montel Jackson looked like a threat. Daniel Marcos looked like he was running from the threat. And the threat in this instance didn't really do much in order to push the action to get us towards a finish. So I'm very disappointed in the way that this one went. Daniel Marcos ended up losing. This was another fight that I ended up getting wrong. Cameron Smotherman versus Serhey Sidey at bantamweight. Oh man, so okay, I like this. This fight was decent. I don't know about what you guys think about this. I don't really like Serhey Sidey at bantamweight. I think he's too tall. I think in close in the pocket, his range is too long for the height of the fighters that he's fighting. Whenever he can't get active with knees or shots up the middle, he's going to miss all of his hooks. In close, Cameron Smotherman wasn't even moving his head. They were just chest to chest, and Serhey Sidey was just throwing hooks with the range of motion that he would normally have in his arm, and his hands were going like past Smotherman's head. They were going behind his head, and he was missing a lot of his shots this way. And these are hooks that he's turning his hands over while throwing. And these should be some of the most damaging strikes that he's able to throw. And he can't land them because he's too tall. I think Smotherman needed to be more aggressive in order to win this fight. I don't think his output was there. I don't think he was motivated enough to get on the inside. He stayed on the outside where he was just getting jabbed and sniped with the left and right hands by Serhey Sidey, who was switching stances and looking like a pretty high-level striker with his kicks and mixing up his punches with those too. Cameron Smotherman would get frustrated at times and then move in to try to land an overhand or an uppercut or start working close boxing. But what would end up happening most of the time is Serhey Sidey would just take him down or shoot a takedown and make him sprawl, and they would start grappling. Sidey looks like a pretty complete martial artist. I'm not sure how his chin will do at this weight class since he did look pretty drawn out and large for bantamweight. But against the Smothermans of the world, I think that he'll do a good job of weeding them out. I think that we are basically looking at another Davy Grant. And he'll grow into his frame, maybe, or end up just moving to featherweight. But at some point, he's going to be a fighter who is going to become a household name on the prelims, hopefully not in the Apex anymore. I'm glad that we're moving away from the Apex. I was really tired of watching cards take place there. Serhey Sidey by unanimous decision. This was a pretty good win for him. I actually don't think that my hype in this prospect is misplaced at all. The first fight of the prelims was Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. And I saw this stat. You know, Jim Miller has the most wins in the UFC. I think that Jeremy Stephens broke the record last night for most losses in the UFC against Mason Jones. Mason Jones came out, and I will say, Jeremy Stephens does hit hard. Mason Jones was wearing a lot of cosmetic damage through the midpoint of this fight, and it didn't really even look like Jeremy Stephens was doing too much except for throwing a couple of hooks whenever the opportunities presented themselves, and also just landing a few jabs and straight punches too, and that really ate up Mason Jones's face. But like I had said before, Mason Jones was just going to mix the martial arts and come out and beat Jeremy Stephens technically, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Whenever things got spicy for him in exchanges of boxing, Mason Jones always had a takedown or a clinch that he could use to trip to get the fight to the ground, just to get some wind out of Jeremy Stephens. But another thing that I didn't anticipate was that Mason Jones actually has some hands on him, and he was boxing with Jeremy Stephens. And I thought this fight was going to end in the second round because he was getting really close to Jeremy and just hanging out in the phone booth with him. And he was getting some elbows off, which ended up cutting Jeremy Stephens too. And once the blood started flowing on both sides, this fight really just became a bar brawl. Once Mason Jones started to fight less clean and engage in this game of just seeing who has the bigger nuts with Jeremy Stephens, I was nervous because I thought that he might have gotten to sleep, but he stayed actually very responsible with his defense. He took some big shots off of Jeremy Stephens in this fight, but he always knew when to wrestle. He always had the control in those positions. He's a very strong grappler. If Jeremy Stephens were to come back and knock someone out, Mason Jones would have been the perfect guy for him to do it against. So the fact that he didn't win this fight by brutal knockout, and he was scoring with some of his hardest shots, and still not knocking out Mason Jones, just lets us know that this guy is probably washed, and he should have never even fought here to begin with. He was at his hometown, though, so he got a pretty loud crowd pop, but I was pretty underwhelmed by seeing Jeremy Stephens compete. I really feel like all of the fighters from the Jose Aldo era / McGregor era need to just kind of cycle out at this point. They all need to just get Raid Shadow Legends sponsorships and stop fighting, because I really don't know what this nonsense was. This was actually a nonce fight. I'm not going to break down the other fights on the prelims, but I will talk about notable performances. Yana Santos beat up Miesha Tate. Miesha Tate is done for, retire. Ryan Loder, I picked to beat Azamat Bekaev. Azamat is just a big snarling, and he was just chucking big, mean overhands at Ryan Loder. And that's what I had talked about before. Azamat Bekaev is just an ogre. He's an ogre, and he just chucks nasty shots and just big, powerful bombs at the guys that he's fighting. And I should have seen this one coming, honestly. He clubbed him to death, and it was easy. Jillian Roberts retired Marina Rodriguez. That was pretty cool. Gaston Bolaños' fight was actually pretty funny, too. Thomas Peterson put on a Grant Dawson masterclass, and Juliana Miller versus Ivana Petrovic just kind of happened. Gaston Bolaños This was such a weird fight. Gaston Bolaños got dominated in the first round, and then he gets up after having been dominated by Kwang Lee, and he does this. Like, what? He was protesting the fact that he had just got his butt whooped at the entire first round. And then the second round happens. Kwang Lee ends up taking Gaston Bolaños back and then wrapping into RNC. And Bolaños just doesn't tap, so he goes to sleep. And so he's like unconscious, bro. Whenever I get to see that happen, I think it's kind of novel because not a lot of fighters are down to just go to bed in the octagon. Because, I mean, it is scary passing out. But Gaston Bolaños allowed himself to get choked unconscious out of frustration, bro. He was mad about the fact that he had just gotten mogged on the ground, so he was like, man, if you can't beat him, join him. So he just let himself get choked out. He just let it happen. So, yeah, not a bad card. Hopefully UFC 315 can deliver better fights. It was something to do in between Ian Machado Gary and then Volkanovski's fight with Diego Lopez, and then this weekend upcoming, which is going to be Bilal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena. Afterwards, we have Gilbert Burns versus Michael Morales to look forward to. Blanchfield versus Macy Barber. Ooh. Like, bro, foghorn noise. I'm going to put one over this, actually. Afterwards, we have Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili 2 at UFC 316. And then afterwards, dude, we have Usman versus Buckley, Hill versus Roundtree Jr. the week following that. Nothing for UFC 317 International Fight Week. Hopefully Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev, and then Holloway versus Poirier 3. So in the upcoming weeks, we actually have a really good couple of months of fights ahead of us. So hold out for more predictions, more general content. I will be back with more of that. I think that I'm going to double upload today since I was a little bit late with this, but you guys have a good one, okay? Take care, like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you fellas in the next one.